Okay, everybody who's still listening at these arbitrarily scheduled podcasts that come out pretty much whenever Ursula feels like getting involved.
That is not true.
No, it's entirely true. Don't listen to anything. Don't listen to any of Ursula's protests to the contrary. But here we are once again. This one actually I think is going to come out on time. So I think our record though for 2018 is two episodes in a row on time. So we'll see if we can get to 3 in this next series.
I'm on it.
healthiq.com/catalyst. If you are a human being who plans on dying sometime in the future, you probably want to look into some life insurance. And these guys will get you better rates based on scientific evidence that shows that healthy people who lift weights, take care of themselves, like all of you listeners do, I'm sure, that you basically live longer so they can insure you for less money. And they don't just refer you to an insurance company. They actually take you through the entire process, start to finish. So go check them out, healthiq.com/catalyst. If you have a moment after you get a great deal on life insurance, then you can go over to iTunes or Google Play or whatever you listen to this podcast on, and please post a review. We would very much appreciate that. We've got a lot of great reviews, but you know what's better than a lot of great reviews? Even more great reviews. Wouldn't you agree, Ursula?
Yes.
Okay.
We finally agree wholeheartedly.
Finally, whatever. We pretty much always agree.
It's true.
We agree on just about everything except what to do with your phone during a podcast.
I have it unplugged and unplugged, like double unplugged.
You need to unplug it, put it under your mattress, throw the bed outside of the house, and set it on fire. Short of that, I do not trust that the phone will not ring.
I don't think it is. I did
put it on the next fucking Tesla rocket that they're going to launch. All right. So what do you have coming up that people need to attend?
That's
right. What are the required activities for our listeners?
Well, I mean, I'm going to be up by you. We talked about this in Oregon, doing an Art of Coaching Weightlifting on June 22nd through the 24th. So be prepared for me, Greg.
I don't even know what preparing for you entails.
I'll let Amy know. I only eat blue M&Ms. No, I'm kidding.
Wait, do they make blue M&Ms? I don't eat M&Ms.
I don't even know. I wouldn't know. I don't even eat M&Ms, really.
Okay.
I think they do.
Yeah,
I don't know. I
right.
just put the whole thing in my mouth. So
M&Ms are a great candy if you live in like 1956.
Hey.
What an outdated candy.
I don't need an age commentary. You know why M&Ms are great?
No, I don't. I can't think of one reason why M&Ms are great.
Eat just one or two, and then, I mean, I've never done that, but I'm just saying.
No one has ever eaten 1 or 2 M&Ms unless it's the last 1 or 2 M&Ms they have available to them.
But you could. So if you were if you were really watching your caloric intake, you could.
Yeah.
So that makes them a good thing. Because like a Snickers bar, kind of got to eat the whole thing. Anyways.
No, you could eat 1 bite.
No, it's not built for that.
Okay, you're right. M&Ms are the perfect diet candy.
I think you're onto something.
Okay.
Good assessment. And then I have, let's see, San Diego, August 24th through 26th. We think. But those are the only 2 that I have on the schedule right now. I'm going back to Hawaii to do a level 1 and 2. And we're talking about doing an Art of Coaching Weightlifting out there, but we'll see. Anyways, that's it. So coming up next is the one in Oregon.
All right.
So if anybody's anywhere near that part of the country,
really northern California.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Is that what you consider it? I was thinking Canada.
Pretty much. Southern Canada, Northern California, basically.
Yeah.
Somehow Washington gets in there, but Washington is just where all the Canadian rain goes.
Aww.
Oh.
A lot of friends in Washington.
I have friends in Washington too. What does that have to do with anything?
I'm just saying.
I didn't say it was a bad thing. Some people love getting rained on all the time. The friend of mine who lives there likes being rained on all the time.
I think most of our friends have left, right?
Think what?
And Matt doesn't live there anymore, does he? Was it Matt?
No, Matt's back in Arizona, where he's from. But John Thrush is still up there.
Yeah, John. And it's the Thibaults, or what's Andrea's husband's name?
I don't know who you're talking about.
Andrea Thibault. She's up there too.
Okay.
Anyways, whatever. Okay.
Bully for her.
Yeah, poor thing.
Okay. We have 3 people, 4 questions. Getting weird on this one. But Tara here had 2 questions that I thought were both good, even though they have nothing to do with each other. Well, I guess there's the theme of competition, but it's a loose connection here. Or I guess the theme of weightlifting, one could say. So there's just all kinds of snug connections between these questions. All right. Tara says, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Thanks for the podcast. It's great. I'm a recreational masters lifter and attended nationals 2 weeks ago in support of 3 lifters on my team, 2 in B sessions, 1 in A session. I left the experience with 2 questions. Tara, if you leave a senior national championships with only 2 questions, you had a pretty good weekend.
Yeah.
I've been going for a long time, and I leave with more than 2 questions every time. I'm sure Ursula is similar. Yeah. Of course, half those questions we probably can't ask publicly.
Yeah, they're unrelated to actual lifting, probably.
Not all of them, but yeah, plenty of them are.
Like 40 of mine are not related to lifting, and a handful are.
Yes. The non-weightlifting life. Okay, number 1. All 3 lifters were overweight by about half a kilo when they got to the venue to weigh in and either saunaed or spit to make weight. Is this a smart strategy? To my uninformed thinking, I always want to read that as uniformed thinking. That's when your thinking needs to be...
Well, she did spell uniformed. Or unless
she did. Okay, yeah. That wasn't me just misreading it.
No, that was a typo.
Uninformed thinking, why not drop that last bit earlier so that you wake up at the right weight the day of competition? Clearly this doesn't matter at my level, but at the senior national level? Before I even read the second question, let's just tackle that one first.
Okay.
You know what? I think, Ursula, you probably have really good answers on this because you coach Derek, who is always having to cut weight, and I know has had some tough cuts. So I'm curious to hear your take on this because mine might be a little different, but maybe not that different.
Well, I mean, to optimize your results versus your body weight, you would train at a higher body weight, which would then require a weight cut. And ideally, you're not at the lower body weight for a very long period of time. I mean, what we normally try to do is get on weight literally within the hour to minutes before you're going to step on the scale. I mean, if I can get Derek to 62 kilos and he only weighs 62 kilos for the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that he has to wait, and then we start rehydrating him again and putting food back in him, then we've, to me, done exactly what we need to do, which is weigh in at that weight, but not really be at that weight. So you get the advantage of having weighed that weight just for the time frame that was necessary to be in that weight class, but then you're actually competing at a heavier body weight, and you've had all of your training and preparation done at a heavier body weight, and physiologically you've done had minimal impact on your actual state of being because you weren't at that weight for very long. So you never really adjusted to being that light. You were just there momentarily. So, I mean, I had Chad who was cutting to 77. We had Derek who is cutting to 62 still. And then Jody who would cut down to 48. And I got a lot of flack for all of them cutting because they had all been in higher weight classes previously. But we did it specifically to raise their caliber internationally. It really it had little to do with the national level. At the national level, unless you're qualifying internationally, I don't really push people to go down if it looks like it might affect if it's a big weight cut. But obviously, a half a kilo is a pound. Like, that's really not much to lose. So, I mean, if they got to weigh-ins, you say got to the venue to weigh in with still a pound to lose. Like, obviously, they were they've either been cutting or they had the intent of they'd have to have gotten there somewhat earlier, unless they just didn't make weight the first cut. Like, they were trying to make weight and they just weren't efficient. I mean, the goal is to make weight and to be on it exactly at the time you weigh in and not have to do multiple efforts. So if they got there with a pound over, I'm assuming they got there, 30 minutes to 45 minutes before their session started, got in the sauna, kept spitting, were on weight just to make weight, and then went on with their lives. But I think if you're trying to raise the caliber of your performance, if I can do, say a 125 and a 150 total, either as a 69 or as a 62, obviously I'm a better caliber lifter if I do that as a 62. So a lot of it is really dependent on whether that athlete can hold the results that were done in training at the lower body weight. So in that case, it's a smart strategy to do the weight cut. Now, if every time I do the weight cut, my lifts drop substantially and it doesn't really raise my quality level, then I would no longer think that was a prudent weight cut and I would move to the next class.
Yeah.
I did it with Spencer for a while too. And then we finally stopped cutting when it became obvious that we needed to go to 77. We pretty much squeezed everything we could out of him as a 69. And when it became apparent that you're going to start losing results going down to 69, and he had actually filled into the 77 class, then it was time to go 77, and he was able to win some medals there as well. So.
Well, I mean, I agree with that, certainly in the most general sense, but I think with specific cases, my opinion really changes. So, like you said,
absolutely.
if you can make a significant weight cut and have the same good results, then obviously that is a good strategy. Totally agree with that. The trick is that a lot of people can't do that, or they try to cut too much weight, or they do it the wrong way, or they don't rehydrate properly, and all those things. So they totally lose the advantage. The other issue with it too is just from a training and planning perspective, is if you are always training significantly heavier than your competition weight, and you don't control that cut well, you don't respond to the cut well, then not only are you gonna lose that performance, but it's gonna be fairly unpredictable. And I've seen that bite a lot of people in the ass, where, oh, well, in the gym I've been hitting this and this and this, every single week for the last 6 months, and then they'll go in there, open 10 kilos under that, and still bomb out. And so if you're losing 4 or 5 kilos, like some of these people are trying to cut, it can just have catastrophic effects on your ability to lift those weights. And you also have the psychological aspect of it. On the one hand, psychologically, it's great to train heavy because you can feel those heavy weights, move them around, you feel strong. But then if you make a big weight cut, you don't, rehydrate well, or it was really, really stressful because it came down to the wire. You had to weigh in 4 times to make it. You're jogging back and forth between the sauna, you're spitting in a cup, all those things just to make weight at the very last second of that, hour window. Then you're probably going to feel extremely drained, both physically and mentally. And so those weights that you thought were so easy at this heavier body weight, and you'd go out there and you would just totally smoke them, just crush you. And that's disastrous. So you never want to end up in that position. So, a big part of it comes down to the experience and experimenting with the weight cut and different ways of doing it. But the key is what Ursula was saying, is that you want to be that lighter body weight for as brief a period of time as possible. But on top of that, you want to get there in the least stressful way possible. And typically what that's going to mean is that it's a water cut overwhelmingly, if not exclusively. versus a food cut where you're starving yourself. That's the best way to make yourself feel terrible on competition day, and to lose whatever advantage you had going into it from a heavier body weight. And you want to do it in a way that isn't totally miserable. So doing like a hyperhydration protocol versus sitting in a sauna and spitting, the hyperhydration protocol is going to get you a big drop in water weight in order to weigh in lighter without your feeling like you're going to die. So if you can plan that, if you can practice that, you can lose a few kilos just by doing that, the week leading into the meet versus trying to wring out 1 kilo the night before in a sauna and feeling terrible. So planning ahead is huge on that. And again, knowing ahead of time what you're going to do and what is going to work is really key. So every time you cut weight, you've got to keep really good notes. You've got to try to keep as many factors consistent as possible so that you can actually assess what the factors that you're changing are doing. How is that actually influencing everything? Did this get me on weight more easily? Did I feel better in the competition? Was it worth it? So maybe you can cut 2 kilos, no problem. Maybe 2.5 or 3 kilos though is a deal breaker. Like you just can't handle it. And of course that varies with body weight. A 48 cutting 2 kilos is a hell of a lot different than a 105 cutting 2 kilos. 2 kilos to a 105, I can lose 2 kilos overnight just by sleeping. I'll float 1.5 kilos easily, most days. So again, take copious notes, practice this stuff outside of competition too. 2 months before a competition, practice a hyperhydration protocol going into, say, like a heavy Friday or Saturday training. See what happens with your body weight without changing your food necessarily. Maybe you're reducing sodium or something, but don't, cut your carbs in half or something drastic like that. See what weight comes off. See how you feel physically and mentally. See how you perform that day. And that's going to go a long way of to helping you plan for an actual cut in competition. And talk to people who have done it a lot of times, because there's a lot of lifters who don't ever cut weight. I personally have almost never had to cut weight. A lot of my lifters have never really had to cut weight, and then some of them always have to cut weight, and each of them does it a little bit differently. So talk to someone, or multiple lifters who have done it, and kind of get a good survey of the different methods, because what works for you, it's just like, training and programming. What works for you is going to be a little different than what works for someone else. Even that's a great lifter and you want to be great like he or she is, doesn't mean you do things the exact same way. The one final note I would put on here is, and Ursula pretty much said this already, but you shouldn't be 0.5 kilo over when you show up to weigh in. You're too late. You can be 0.5 kilo over the morning you wake up for a weigh-in in a few hours. That's fine. But when you show up to weigh in, you should already be at weight. You shouldn't be panicking when you step on the scale. Because again, even if it's not physically draining to lose that weight in the last hour, psychologically, think of how stressful that is. Going into a competition, you should be able to be relaxed. You should be able to be focusing on visualizing your attempts and your warm-ups and all these things, and whatever your preparation routine is that helps you perform as well as possible, rather than pulling your hair out and freaking out and texting your coach over and over again, or whatever, crying and all these things that you're going to do when you're not on weight and you have only 40 minutes to figure it out. You got to avoid that if at all possible. And sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes you end up at a crazy venue where you don't have access to your normal food. Especially internationally, you end up at the host of the meet, whoever is providing the food, and a lot of times you end up with meat that's covered in sauces, that's full of salt, all these factors that you can't control as well. And so you need to be ready to freak out if you have to, but go into it ahead of time with a really clear plan that you are very confident is going to work and put you in the right place so that you don't have to flip out and spend 45 minutes trying to make weight. Is there anything else we missed on that?
No, I think you're pointing out something very important in that there's a protocol both for the weight cut and for post weigh-in.
Oh, yeah. Talk about that.
A regimen.
The reconstitution phase.
Mm-hmm. And you don't want, because you have 2 hours from the beginning of weigh-ins until introductions, you don't want to cut into that, which really reduces to about an hour and 40 minutes, because weigh-ins, unless you're just the first name called, can take anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. You don't want to cut into that recovery time that you're using for post weigh-in. So it's really important to make sure that the first time you step on the scale that you have made weight. And I mean, unless the only sauna is there and you're showing up before to get in that sauna, and you're trying to make the cut exact. But I would assume that, like, for 0.5, I know for each lifter what that means in terms of the amount of time that we have to spend in our case, boiling, and the amount of time that we need to spend wrapped. Like, I know how much that is for different lifters based on whether it's their first round or their second round. And you should have some idea. If you use a sauna as a recovery method, that's a good time to find out, when you're in a hydrated state, how much water you can lose and how much time. So if you take that opportunity, if you normally use sauna for as a recovery method, you could always check, what do I weigh before I go in? I'm in there for 10 minutes. How much do I lose in 10 minutes? And that gives you some gauge, especially if you've never cut before, because you don't want to just wing it and take some guess. So that idea of maybe not getting your weight all the way down, but practicing and understanding how much water you retain versus how much water you lose. Now, if you sauna regularly, that helps you break a sweat more readily. So that's a good practice to have if you know that you normally cut weight, and you can use it simultaneously for recovery. The other thing I would add is that for me, cutting weight is really an elite national level lifter or an elite senior level lifter process. For youth and masters, I don't really see the necessity. And I'm not saying that you can't be competitive. I think that the extra, or certainly on a youth that's growing, you would expect them to continue moving up classes. Cutting weight is not such a great idea. And you certainly don't want to subject them to any methods that are going to be strenuous and may affect their actual lifting. They should just be focused on lifting and enjoying the lifting. For a master's lifter, I guess it's a question of whether you need that weight cut to break records and or to make some international competition. We do have a kind of a standard. I would say 2 to 4% of your body weight is the most that you'd want to cut in water, 4% being on a pretty high end. If you're cutting 2% of your body weight in water, that generally doesn't have so much of a physiological effect on you. But once you get into 3% and 4%, it possibly could, especially affect you psychologically and physiologically if you don't know how to rehydrate and fuel yourself through the competition itself. So I would say, less than 3% body weight loss in water is deemed acceptable. But again, we're talking for elite national level lifters, senior elite international lifters. I would subject to that, but I wouldn't subject a master's lifter or definitely not a youth lifter to that protocol if they can't do it just by controlling their food intake. You're just not in that class in that case, because I think in those categories you should be focusing on the aspect of enjoying the actual lifting. You're not going to go to the Olympic Games, and so it removes the necessity to do any extreme measures, which I see cutting weight as a fairly extreme measure, especially if you're having to sauna off 2 or 3 or 4% of your weight in water.
Yeah, if you're not extremely elite, you should be able, in my opinion, to make weight by, say, maybe not drinking any water after, the afternoon of the day before you weigh in, or, just sipping on water. That's going to get a significant amount of weight off, and it's really not stressful to your body. It's pretty easy to do. If you require more than that, there better be a really good reason to do it regularly. But what about, so we've covered that to death, but what about your kind of rehydration protocol? Because it should be more complex than just drinking some water, because there's more goes into that. What you eat along with the water, what else you drink. Most people are going to use Pedialyte or Gatorade because you want to replace electrolytes, in particular salt, if you've had to sweat a bunch off, or if you've had to cut a bunch of water weight. You need to get most likely a bunch of carbohydrate replenishment, and you need to do it in a way where all that liquid you're consuming, you're retaining as much of it as possible, rather than drowning yourself in water and then having to pee it all out every 5 minutes while you're trying to warm up. So, what's your basic protocol to kind of get someone back totally rehydrated after a tough weight cut?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Or you're just...
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Well, first, Pedialyte. Everybody I've ever had cut weight, we've always used Pedialyte right after, just to restore electrolyte balance. And usually it has some sugar in it as well, so that combination is good. A lot of the athletes that have cut, and I let them use what they prefer, because they're going to have to drink it down. Vitamin water is usually added as well, or a Gatorade of some sort. Coconut water has been one of the go-tos. Carb replenishment of some sort. I have a hard time with someone like Derek, who's in a constant state of ketosis. So we usually do some sort of fats, but I'll try to sneak in some carbs. I make a salt sugar water combination just to stave off cramps. And so I'll usually make that and have them drink that and sip it as they're actually lifting, to keep it in their system, to keep some balance in their system, to keep sugar and salt. There's a magnesium packet that I like to use as well to help with cramping. So, once you've cut, especially if you've cut some significant amount of water weight, cramps become the issue. And so all of this rehydration, besides getting them to feeling normal again and to reclaim your homeostatic basis in terms of your electrolytes and calcium, magnesium, so that the muscles are going to contract and potassium without cramping, we end up using, and a lot of the athletes like coconut water, some prefer a Gatorade, but Pedialyte for sure, the salt sugar water combination and a magnesium packet that's actually poured into water are usually the base of what we would give in the fluid reconstitution. And then in terms of food, I like to have something like a muffin or bread, just a little bit, because you're not going to be able to eat too much if you've actually cut both water and you've been decreasing your caloric intake without feeling bloated. So, we make sure that we drink these over time and not just chug them all. The Pedialyte, they usually get one of those in their system really fast. And of course, we do, most of these things have water in them already, but I'll also usually give them some water. I remember always just wanting a big glass of ice water when I was done. And when you put salt and sugar in it, it's probably not I know it's not as appetizing because I've done those too. So usually I try to get the Pedialyte in their hand first and get them to drink that. And then I'll make the sugar water and let them have coconut water or vitamin water as a secondary hydration drink. And then the magnesium packet we usually take about 30 minutes before they lift to try to make sure we don't get any kind of cramping, and then keeping that salt sugar water available.
Yeah.
But in terms of the actual food, that really depends. I used to have a cheeseburger, which seemed like a little small, McDonald's or Burger King cheeseburger. And it was small enough that I could eat like half of it. And then, with all of the fluid that I was putting into my stomach, it would absorb, the bread would absorb a little bit of that fluid, so I didn't feel like bloated.
Yeah.
And then I managed to usually gag down the other half somewhere in between. A lot of my friends like something sweet, so it's funny that we were talking about M&Ms early, because like Amanda liked peanut butter M&Ms. Ugh. And yeah, I don't know.
I can't imagine eating candy like after a weight cut.
She would use it specifically between snatch and clean and jerk.
Well, that's a little different, because by then you're feeling a little more normal.
Right. You're feeling normal, and your body needs that sugar. And so,
I definitely have eaten a lot of Snickers between snatch and clean and jerk.
Snickers was Robin's go-to. John Coffey used to always get us Snickers for the meat. And there are things that most people don't eat normally, but we're just talking about, this 2-hour time frame that you're trying to get through performance and give your body the fuel that it needs for that. So it might be outside of your normal diet and be functional.
I think the fundamentals for people who are trying to figure out what to do is, number one, it has to be palatable. Like, you have to be able to eat it. And I think a lot of people really look past that, and they're like, okay, well, I've got to have this like super healthy, perfect food. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter how healthy it is at that point. First of all, it's one meal. Second of all, if you can't eat it, it really is immaterial how healthy it is. So it's got to be something that's really calorically dense, so that you can get away with eating very little volume of it, and it still gives a significant amount of actual, calorie and carb content in particular. It's got to not make you
off fats. We usually do avocados.
He's a rare case. So if you are like running around ketogenic, then that's a whole nother story. You can bring your fucking pork rinds and whatever you need, but
avocados.
Pork rinds and avocado would actually probably be amazing together. Anyway, so make sure it's palatable. Make sure it's something that for a fact does not cause GI distress for you. It blows my mind when people choose to use competition day to try out a new food. Don't do that. Don't try new things on competition day. That's the very last time you ever want to do that. The last thing you want is to be shitting your pants, in between snatch attempts. It's really hard to get your singlet off fast enough. I had a lifter one time eat sushi. He lifted late at night. He ate a bunch of sushi, and I think this was in like Reno. So that's already a dubious choice. And he was so sick the whole time he was lifting. I was like, dude, what on earth possessed you to make that choice? He's like, well, I'm never going to do that again. Yeah. Okay. Next time, maybe ask someone first, so you don't have to, learn this lesson the hard way. Let someone else's mistakes, teach you. So anyway, the other thing to add, I think, would be somewhat salty food too, because that again is going to help you. So like Ursula was saying, some kind of like bread sort of thing that will help absorb water. But if you eat a saltier food, it's going to help you retain, more of that liquid that you're drinking. So it's not just sloshing around in your guts the whole time. It's actually doing something helpful for you. And the Pedialyte, totally agreed. Like, I'll tell people, you got to have that in your hand when you go to weigh-ins. And the second you get off the scale and put your chonies back on, you're drinking that, and get that down as quickly as possible. And then you can start kind of sipping a little more gradually and eating, because you want to get that initial push really, really fast, as far away from the time that you're lifting as possible. One, because you're going to feel better, but two, you're not going to have as much liquid in your stomach again. When you start warming up for snatches, and every time you lean over, it feels like a liter of water goes up, into your throat. It's pretty distracting and uncomfortable. So that's
certainly, if you're going to do a bigger weight cut, there's certainly some practice that it requires to perfect it. Every time we go down for a weigh-in for athletes that are cutting weight, we have a whole, there's a whole bag of, for the most part, tried and tested rehydration fuel.
Yeah. And I mean, stuff like Pop-Tarts, things like that, where it's like most people find those pretty palatable. They're easy to eat. They're quick to eat. They last for 25 years, even unwrapped. They'll give you the little bit of that kind of pastry, the bread sort of stuff. They'll give you a bunch of carbs, quickly digested carbs that should get back into your muscles and liver pretty quickly. Don't try to bring a steak and a lobster tail and some lemon butter and stuff. It's just not going to go over well. Not that most weightlifters can afford steak and lobster, but you get my point, I think. All right. Should we move on to Tara's second question?
Yeah.
Okay. That question took longer than I expected, so hopefully that was somewhat coherent and helpful. So Tara's second question: how do you recommend practicing counting attempts? I'd really like to develop this skill, and I understand the concept. I tried to practice from the front in sessions I watched, pick a lifter and see if I could figure out how many out they were each attempt. But in those sessions where everyone was taking the same weights and everyone was constantly moving openers, I couldn't keep up. I often have to count for myself, but at local meets, there are typically like 2 junior high girls lifting what I do, so not too hard. Thanks for being a great resource of weightlifting knowledge and information. This is a huge one. And this is one of the things I covered in my book, when I first put it out, because it was so important. That was one of the things that I really panicked trying to learn, when I was first getting into coaching. I've written a couple articles like really trying to simplify it. But
so have I.
The
information's out there for sure, but there's nothing like actual practice.
Exactly. That's what it always comes down to, is you have to get the experience. Not only to practice to learn how to do it, but that experience will help keep you calm and help you maintain that presence of mind to adjust to unexpected things and to make decisions under that pressure, rather than totally panicking when things go differently than expected. And you can't, no matter how much you study and practice this stuff, you can't learn that kind of calm state of mind that you get from actually doing it. And even more than that, the appearance of being calm that you show your lifters, even when internally you may be losing your fucking mind. That's a huge one. Yeah. And it's like being able to just be like totally flat affect, nothing showing on your face, nothing showing in your voice, even when you're going, holy shit, if this lifter had any idea what was going on right now at the table or in my brain, they would probably bomb out. I've definitely been in that position a couple times. And so you really got to practice faking.
Kidding.
Yeah. You know what? And I will be the first to admit that warming someone up in a competition where there's a lot of jockeying going on and crazy stuff, that is the thing that I am least good at as a weightlifting coach. And I'm very aware of that.
I love the most. I love it.
I didn't say I dislike it necessarily. I just said it's the thing that I'm not as good at, because
it's not even that you can become good at it. It's just because there's so many unknown variables at any point in time.
Oh, but you can be good at it. Yeah. And it's being able to keep a lot of information organized in your mind and at hand and accessible rapidly, and being able to make those split-second decisions and being able to see strategy ahead of time. Mm-hmm. And some people are naturally very good at that. And some people like me, I'm Rain Man in certain ways, but I don't, I can't count the toothpicks when they fall on the floor instantaneously like Ursula can. So that for me, it was really a matter of getting a lot of practice. And what was helpful for me as a kind of burgeoning coach was having, Mike Bergner, who was my coach, kind of mentor me in that stuff, and, asking him questions and helping him at competitions with other lifters, so I could kind of get a sense of what he was looking for, how he was reacting to things, and just, the basic protocol. But then again, you just have to eventually go out and do it. And doing it with multiple lifters in a single session, that'll really teach you how to stay calm, or at least fake it, and, you know, kind of keep track of things, and then learning what works best for you in terms of writing things down or making notes. Some people, I know coaches who never write anything down. And then I'm the opposite end of the spectrum, where I will write my lifter's entire, you know, warm-up sequence, how many attempts I'm going to take each, or time if they you know, have to start before the actual session starts. And I will make notes the whole way through that session. I will make notes about, you know, any changes I have to make. I will make notes about, you know, if we're in the mix for medals, I'll be making notes. Okay, I need to watch, you know, these 3 lifters. I've got to get, you know, once we're in the clean and jerk, okay, I need to beat this lifter by, you know, +3. I need to beat this lifter by +2, you know, whatever it is. And maybe I don't necessarily need to write it down, but I think it helps me feel like I've got a little better control over what's going on, and I'm not going to screw up this lifter's entire life because I forgot about one lifter, or, you know, I didn't look at the B session results, and, you know, some girl in the B session had some crazy big snatch and I overlooked that, or, you know, whatever the case is. So that all comes with practice and experience. But short of being able to coach a bunch of people, what you're doing, you know, by sitting in the crowd and looking at the scoreboard, I can't see the scoreboard from the seats. I'm like half blind, like Mr. Magoo out there. But that's a really good way to do it. And it is a good way to, you know, pick a single lifter and, you know, after every few attempts, go in there and count, you know, okay, how many attempts does this lifter have? And it's a good experience now, especially in our national competitions, because there are so many lifters lifting the same or very similar weights, because that complicates the counting, right? You have to know, you know, the basic rules of, okay, if there are 3 lifters who have 100 kilos in for the next attempt, how do you know which one of them goes first? And so making sure that you're familiar with all of those rules and that you can recognize those things instantaneously to make your counting more easy, also known as easier, then, you know, that's going to help you when you actually go in and practice coaching an actual lifter. Ursula, save me. I'm rambling at this point.
No, I mean, you're giving all good information.
Jump in.
Well, I mean, I think there are unknowns, but like Greg said, you can have some information about those unknowns, but you still don't. There's no crystal ball. So, for example, there are coaches that always put in a lower opener than they intend to start with. So you're looking at their lifters on the platform and seeing, you know, is where they are at in their warm-up a reasonable place for them to be for that opener. So you can assess information going on around you to try to predict some things. Now, you could get off, like you could be wrong. I've had circumstances where I'm like, that guy's he's already warmed up too close to his opener. He's gonna drop it.
Oh, that's gotten me a couple times.
Yeah, or he's you know, he's too far out. Like right now, he should be at 125 if he's really going to open at 130, and he's you know, or he's hitting 128, so you know he's not going to open with 130 because it's a guy, and guys don't usually make a 2 kilo jump for their opener. It would be something like in the low 30s, and so that gives you some information or some feedback. But then if he misses it horribly, then probably he is going to open with 130 or even lower it if there's that possibility. So, I mean, there are things that you can watch going on around in the warm-up room itself that give you some feedback. Now, I wouldn't get entirely too distracted by that, because then you would be looking at the cards and looking at how numbers are going. I, like Greg, write down my warm-ups, and I check the actual screen and the cards. You can get caught in something where if you're not keeping an eye on what's going, and this is why it's nice to have 2 people back there that know what's going on.
Yeah.
People can start changing their openers, which changes your count. And if that happens, you have to stay on top of it. What I usually will do is kind of I write out a warm-up protocol that says, we're going to take 3 minutes between the last few snatches, and then between each of those last warm-up attempts, and then early on, we're going to take 2 minutes. or something like that. But you have to be ready to be adaptable, because if all of a sudden your count changes and you're not where you're supposed to be, you don't want to rush the athlete. So you might have to adjust then the warm-ups, and you want to do that in a way that doesn't freak out the athlete. But you should also have the athlete ready for that.
Yeah.
Like if we have to take some 7-kilo jumps to get to our weight, just to make sure we're warmed up, but we got enough warm-ups in, that's great. But I've seen people get caught with their pants down where, let's say, they're opening at 120 and their last warm-up that they hit is 105 because the coach made some mistake, or a bunch of people changed from a 120 opener where that guy thought he still had 6 attempts. All of a sudden he's got 2 and he's up.
Which that happens more and more frequently now in these meets. It seems to me more and more of those coaches are putting in low openers and then bumping up at kind of unpredictable amounts. But then also you get that it's like the run on the bank, right? Where one lifter changes their opener and suddenly 6 other coaches run over there freaking out like, oh my God, we got to open ours now, or increase ours now. And then, if you're not on it, you can lose a lot of time really fast.
People are going to make those changes more often than not really close to when they're going to open.
Yeah.
So, and it may be they get their name called and then they change the opener. And if 2 or 3 coaches do that in a row, you can drop 3 attempts, which means now you're 3 attempts behind where you thought you were, if those are close to where you're opening. So you might want to make sure that you're prepared to open a little bit higher than whatever you put in yourself, of course, which triggers that whole change, because you don't want to get caught either. So if everybody starts changing from 120 to 122, you might want to be ready to open with 123. Then it really materially doesn't change anything about your opener. Or just have your athlete in shape to be able to take either bigger jumps or without freaking out themselves, or be prepared for them to change. Or you may actually lower your opener in some cases to try to adjust the amount of rest that they have so they're not rushed. And so those are all things that you have to consider. I think that, all of a sudden we're talking about more than just counting attempts, because the counting attempts part is not really hard until all of these things start to come into play. Like knowing how many lifters you have before you on a board and then writing your warm-up attempts is easy until the meet starts going. Yeah. And then you realize that people change openers. And beyond that, so even if nobody changes their openers, you don't know what people's second and third attempts are going to be. So knowing, a little bit about what each lifter back there has done helps as well. So that's just being informed and or educated.
Which is getting harder these days too, because there are so many new lifters. It used to be 5 years ago, you pretty much knew everyone back there, and you're like, oh, I have an idea. Yeah, I have an idea of what they can lift. I have an idea of how big of a jump they're going to take. Now, I've never seen half these people in my life. God knows what they're going to do. And they're taking, they're increasing their opener 15 kilos less. I've seen insane stuff. You're just like, how could you be that far off? But
and people taking atypical jumps.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, I've just huge jumps and then tiny jumps, or the other way around. They'll take a 3 kilo increase between first and second, and then they'll go up 9 kilos between second and third. They usually don't make it, but they'll take it, and that'll affect the order.
And it still affects your clock.
And then there's crazy stuff now too, where you get 5 2-minute clocks in a row. Or you have so many changes happening that even without 2-minute clocks, it seems to take 20 minutes to get 5 attempts completed. And so you have to slow your warm-up down or add warm-ups, or, it's just really different than it was a few years ago. And you just have to be on your toes. And Ursula's point of having 2 people in the back, 2 coaches, is, that's like the greatest thing ever. You can have one who's really responsible for watching the board, and one who's kind of responsible for being with the athlete, and then the 2 of you can communicate, because you don't want to abandon your athlete on the platform back there. But
which happens if you're by yourself.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
And so you do have to have an athlete who's pretty self-reliant and isn't going to cry and go fetal if you're not there for every single lift. But you do, the board is more important than holding their hands. Like, it doesn't matter if you hold their hands if they're not even ready in time.
Yeah, no, the assistant who has now basically become my co-coach, because I've given him as many responsibilities as I give myself, and in all of I've taught him everything from, if I'm not there to help someone cut weight, he's learning the protocols for different athletes and asking questions and learning about it. So I think, in all of these areas, from the making weight question to, and this is where Greg was like, there is a tie between them, to the learning how to count attempts. If you have someone that you shadow or that mentors you, it really goes a long way in learning all of these processes a lot more quickly.
Yeah.
And that's helpful. I have people now. This is kind of I've done this. I did actually with Jordan Dela Cruz, and it was she wanted to, or Spencer wanted me to teach her how to count attempts, and I was like, she seemed kind of ambivalent as to whether she wanted to learn about it. I said, look, this is a national competition. Don't waste my time. You either want to learn how to count attempts or you don't. And if you do, let's do this.
Yeah.
But if you don't, leave me alone. And I was like, so do you want to learn? She was like, yes. And I was like, okay, here we go. And she, she was taking the step, though, from learning how to count at a local meet, which is where you should start the process, and then moving to, I think it was an Americans. I don't think it was a Nationals, or maybe it was a Nationals. It's very rare for me to agree to mentor someone at a national event. If it's with one of the more competitive level lifters. If they want to shadow, fine, but like for me to have to explain everything I'm doing as I'm doing it, sometimes it's just moving too fast. And I can't explain what's going on in my head at every moment, because it's, like you said, sometimes it's flipping back and forth. Should I do this? Should I do that? And then you're having to make a quick decision. And if you had to just vocalize all that, you might miss the chance on the card to make whatever change you want to make. So it's a little bit harder to get someone to agree to do that in a national level A session if they have somebody who is, in a medal hunt. But in a B session with a national level lifter, at some point in time, you should follow. And I think those are even sometimes better sessions to learn in, because you have more people opening at the same weights or very close, like the totals are very tight. It's when all of those totals are very tight that it becomes the most difficult to read the cards. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been a big game changer. Is it used to be even at nationals, the spread in a single session would be so much greater than it is now.
Yeah.
Now you've got like the top 5 to 8 finishers in some of these sessions, all within a few kilos of each other. So
and
sometimes
all,
the same
5 or
amount.
6 of them opening with the same weights.
Yeah. Well,
so it's beyond just knowing the rules at that point.
Right. Well, and it's beyond knowing the rules. It's having that kind of that confidence that comes with the experience too, where, okay, I've been in this position before. Nobody died. My lifter didn't, hate me afterwards. Like, everything worked out okay. And, every once in a while, something's going to go wrong. But if you stay on top of it, you can usually fix it in time. Your warm-ups are never going to go perfect. Well, almost never. Sometimes they do go perfectly, just kind of by chance. But if you do things right, the athlete's perception is that everything worked fine. Yeah. Because the adjustments you're making it's not like, okay, we're gonna time, like Ursula was saying, every 3 minutes is ideally what we want for our warm-up attempts. So normally you would say that's going to be every 3 attempts on the platform. Sometimes you're going to have to stretch that to 5. Sometimes it's going to be 2. Sometimes it's 1.5. But
that's why everybody has to be adaptable,
right?
You and the athlete. Yeah.
But if you do it in a certain way, the athlete will not really notice that much. If you sprint back from the board like, oh my, you got to take this right now, take it right now, you're going to freak your athlete out.
Yeah.
If you walk back and say, hey, go ahead and take this now, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, okay, everything's fine. Everything's normal. I don't
think they ever notice how much time is in between. Oh, unless they're sitting for a really long time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they can detect the difference between 2 minutes and 15 seconds and 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Typically not, no.
Yeah. They just know they went, they sat down.
Yeah.
And now if they have a whole bunch of, this is why I'm like, if you have like those long ass knee wraps that you got to put on every time, like all that kind of stuff gets in the way. I'm like, just get some damn knee sleeves, or stay wrapped, or stay partially wrapped, or something. Yeah, I've had lifters feel rushed because their pre-attempt or pre-lift protocol is just so fucking long that I'm like, I told you a minute ago to go. Well, and we're on the clock.
that's two things about that. First of all, it drives me nuts. That's not one of the things, but number one, you need to make it really clear with your athlete, hey, you need to be ready. Like, if I tell you it's time to take an attempt, it can't take 3 minutes. Like, we are on the clock here. And so you need to be paying attention. The worst is when you can't get a lifter's attention.
Or when they go to the restroom and they're just gone.
Well, and that's another thing is, number one, if you're going to go to the bathroom, it has to be the moment the bar hits the ground after your warm-up, you're sprinting to the bathroom. Number two, you've got to tell me ahead of time so I can say, okay, yes, after the next attempt, we're going to have time, go do it. So you can, because I've had to adjust warm-ups considerably for that. Where you're like, okay, well, we're going to have to change this a little bit so, we don't end up with, a puddle on the platform. But it can be done, but you got to communicate with the coach, and the coach got to communicate with the athlete. But the last thing is, the last of two things is, aside from them understanding you need them to go, fairly quickly after you tell them, is, with each athlete, the more you coach them, the more you kind of recognize their patterns and how long it takes them to get off their butts and get chalk and get their knee sleeves or whatever it is squared away. So I'll, with certain athletes, I will tell them sooner than other athletes, or I'll tell them, hey, you're going to go in 2 more attempts, or you're going to go in 1 more attempt. So then they're up and they're paying attention and they're getting ready, so that by the time I say, take it now, they have their chalk, they have their knees in order, and they can just go. That's kind of a hassle as a coach to have to give them running commentary, but sometimes that's just what's required. Like you kind of have to learn that the hard way a lot of times, where you feel like your lifter's constantly 2 attempts behind from what you're telling them to do. So it's the onus is on you to adjust in the moment and then talk to them about it afterwards. Like, you can't sit down and have that discussion in the middle of a warm up for a meet. You got to kind of establish that thing beforehand and have kind of a bit of a debrief afterwards and square that away for next time. But there's a lot of stuff to keep you on your toes, that's for sure. I think this is the Tara episode officially. That's the whole deal. Just Tara.
How long have we gone? How long has Tara taken?
57 minutes and 39 seconds.
Tara with an H. Somehow we're blaming Tara, even though we're the long-winded ass people.
I'm not blaming Tara. I'm congratulating Tara for getting her own episode.
Own episode. Yeah, that's true.
It's a first.
Brad was so close. You think Brad is from Australia?
I assume so, since the first word is g'day.
Not to be confused with bidet.
No. Although that could lead to quite a good day. We don't know. All right, guys. Let's leave it at that. This is the official Tara episode.
Tara with an H.
Yeah. Tara's competition episode. Also known as episode 43. Again, if you liked this episode or any others, or you thought they were okay, but you're also a really nice, generous person, please go post a review. Click all the stars you can. As many stars as they have, you click all of them. And then you write in there.
4,000 stars. Yeah. It'll take you a while.
You write in there and you tell the world how wonderful this podcast is and how helpful it is and how much you love us and how much better their lives would be if they would just set aside 1 hour every 2 to 3 weeks to listen, and then tell all their friends and family.
2 to 3 weeks.
Everyone.
2 to once a month.
Maybe that's a fun, exciting thing about this podcast is you're never quite sure when the next one's going to come out, and then when it does come out, it's so thrilling.
It's so exciting. Well,
who needs regularity in their lives?
According to you, yeah, that's not true. Even though that's the
It's definitely
I
not
was
true.
Going for.
The thrill of a new episode is great, but it shouldn't be because you're constantly disappointed every other day that it hasn't come out when it's supposed to.
I suppose that's true. I wanted to mention one thing because right before we got on this podcast, I did one with Cheryl Hayworth and Chad Vaughn.
There she goes, Shane. Name dropping again.
I'm not. They're doing it's a completely different format, obviously, than what we're doing.
Everything is. They're all more
they
professional.
All are,
they have less profanity.
I accidentally cussed once. I tried to cover it up real quick. I think, if I cussed more than once, I don't know. Like, I missed it. I only caught myself once. So any other ones would have slipped by, and I can't claim to know about because I just don't know. Now I feel like I'm in front of some congressional hearing. I don't know. But it's a USA Weightlifting podcast, and I'm not trying to promote other podcasts necessarily on our podcast, but I do support things that Chad and Cheryl do, and I do support USA Weightlifting, so I guess I kind of am. But it's not, they haven't launched it yet, but I think it'll be interesting because you'll have a two-time Olympian and a three-time Olympian, both of whom are quite entertaining in their own right, doing interviews. So I'm expecting you're going to be on it soon, Greg.
Okay.
Oh, by the way, I signed you up for it, Greg.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll have plenty of time in between episodes of the Weightlifting Life to record that one. There will not be competing schedules between this and other podcasts.
Oh, you just be giving me shit right now, mister.
I will quit giving you shit right now because we're done.
Perfect.
Well, we're finished.
The only way to end it. The
only way to end it is yes. It's all over. Okay, guys. Thanks again for listening. We appreciate it. In the meantime, since we're not putting out a new episode, if you've already listened to all of our previous episodes, go ahead and listen to Ursula's episode there with Cheryl and Chad.
Oh, they're not launching till May.
Oh. Well, I guess you're just going to have to listen to all of ours all over again then.
Yep.
It's better anyway. Each time you listen, they're a little bit different. That's the secret. You won't know whether or not that's true until you try it. All right, guys. In all seriousness, thank you. We'll talk to you next time.
All right. Bye.